Okay, good afternoon. This is Noahide here. I'm going to go over a part of the Torah that is a pretty big source of dispute between Christians and Jews, or like myself, Noahides who follow the Jewish path at the capacity of a Gentile. And this is who is the prophet that God promised to raise up for Israel. In chapter 18, verses 15 and 16, and in 18 and in 19. And Christians are obviously saying that it can't be Joshua or it can't be any other prophet that we read about in the Tanakh. It has to be something even greater, because it mentions that I will raise up a prophet from among their own people like you. And they get hung up on the word like you. And the Jews say that there is no promise of somebody with divine origins, that it's going to be a normal human being. And in fact, if we read very closely through Deuteronomy and in the early parts of the book of Joshua, we see that it is in fact Joshua that fits the description of the prophet that God promised to raise up from among the people to lead Israel. After Moses passes away, there has to be a subsequent leader that people respect and follow, as they did Moses. So that's what, in fact, God was promising. And he passed the torch, from Moses to Joshua. And we see that in the early parts of Joshua, in like chapter 1 and again in chapter 4. And we see that there was, a passing of the torch even talked about or written about in the book of Deuteronomy and even in Numbers somewhere, I think in 27. So we see pretty clear that Joshua was the one that chapter 18, verse 18 speaks about. Christians just have a strong dispute against that. And the real source of their contention and the source of their argument that they use is Deuteronomy chapter 34, verse 10. Now I'm going to start in chapter 34, verse 9. And it says, "Now Joshua, son of Nun, was filled with the spirit of wisdom, because Moses had laid his hands upon him, and the Israelites heeded him, doing as the Lord had commanded Moses." Okay, that's a tiny bit vague. It's not lifting Joshua up in detailed words. It says that that the Israelite people heeded Joshua as they heeded Moses. But in this part here is where the Christians find their contention, and they base their argument against that. Chapter 18, verse 18 being fulfilled in Joshua, as the Jewish side of the argument would say. Because of this, here we go. In Deuteronomy 34, verse 10, right after verse 9, which says that the Israelites followed or heeded Joshua as they did Moses, it goes on to say, "Never again did there arise in the land of Israel a prophet like Moses." And if we just stop there, it looks like, oh, well, God promised to raise a prophet from among them like Moses. And it says here, "Never again did there arise in Israel a prophet like Moses." So it appears that in some way this wasn't fulfilled, which means it keeps pointing to someone, a specific person in the future, in the far future, which, according to Christians, will believe that it has to be Jesus. Okay, well, if it stopped there, that would be, maybe a sensible argument, and it would be it would be a resource of real debate on behalf of Christianity. But let's continue on and finish the verse. Okay, "Whom the Lord singled out face to face." Okay, then that's the end of this. So this here, let's read it one more time, starting in verse 9 and verse 9 and 10 of chapter 34 in the book of Deuteronomy. Okay. Now Joshua, son of Nun, was filled with the spirit of wisdom because Moses had laid hands on him, and the Israelites heeded him, doing as the Lord had commanded Moses. So he heeded them the way they heeded Moses. And again, never again did there arise in the land of Israel a prophet like Moses, whom the Lord singled out face to face. Great. Now, we see continue on, what does it say right here? No one shall be able to resist. This is God speaking to Joshua after the death of Moses, after the people began to heed him as they heeded Moses. This is clearly the prophet, the military leader, the leader of Israel that was raised up like Moses. Okay, as I was with Moses, so I will be with you. Continuing on in chapter 1 of the book of Joshua. And they answered Joshua, after Joshua was talking about what they were going to do and the commands and stuff. We will do everything you have commanded us, and we will go everywhere you send us. We will obey you just as we obeyed Moses. Let but the Lord your God be with you as he was with Moses. Any man who flouts your commands and does not obey every order you give him shall be put to death. Only be strong and resolute. Oh my gosh, is that exactly what it says in chapter 18, verse 18? I will put words in his mouth, and anybody that does not listen to him, the commands and so forth, they will be put to death. And that's what it says right there. Here we go, continuing on in chapter 4 of the book of Joshua. After Moses is dead, after the helm of command has been passed to Joshua. On that day, the Lord exalted Joshua. This is chapter 4, verse 14 of the book of Joshua, continuing. On that day, the Lord exalted Joshua in the sight of all Israel, so that they revered him and feared him all the days of his life, as they had revered or feared and respected and honored, etc. Moses. Same thing. So there's even a couple of more, but I'm not going to keep going on. But so what is 34 verse 10 actually saying? I mean, I'm not talking about implying. I'm talking about explicitly. What is it saying? It goes in verse 9, it mentions that Joshua was exalted in the sight of the nations, and people began to heed him the way they heeded Moses, since Moses was now passed away. Moses laid his hands on him. The spirit that was on Moses was drawn from him and landed on Joshua. The people saw, people knew, people feared. We see that they even agreed, everything you say we will do, and anyone that flouts your command and acts presumptuously to do so will be put to death. All of these things 100% confirmed. But in verse 10, Christians get stuck on this one little bit here, the half of the verse, which says, never again did there arise in the land in Israel a prophet like Moses. That's where they stop. But continuing on, whom the Lord singled out face to face. Now what that clearly is saying, it's not implying, this is a caveat. This is saying that God rose up, indeed, chose Joshua to be the successor of Moses. And everybody's going to follow him as they followed Moses. But the caveat is that no one, Joshua included, will ever rival the authority that Moses had. What does that mean? Moses was able to be called, or the Torah, the written Torah, was called the Torah of Moses. There will never be a Torah, a second edition to the Torah, New Testament included, or a Torah 2.0. Great people can rise up, rabbis can rise up, and in an endless sort of a way, they can commentate on the Torah. Sure, Joshua could do that. I'm sure he did. Great people of great spiritual wealth, real Torah scholars from the time that this was going on, way back when, all the way through the Israelites' history, even when the kings were bad and Israel was going in a wrong direction, there was always a segment of righteous people among them who were considered to be Torah scholars. Those people, no problem, could commentate on the Torah. So like the Rambam and the Ramban and the Talmud and so forth. All of those are just commentations on the written Torah. But nobody will ever, including Joshua, they will be like Moses. Joshua was like Moses as far as people revering and following and not flouting any of the commands. Okay? Under the penalty of death even. Okay? That was right there with Moses. But as far as him being a second edition or a continuation of the written Torah, no, no, no. That's the caveat. Verse 10 is the caveat. Never again did there arise in Israel, or will ever arise in Israel, a prophet like Moses, whom the Lord singled out and spoke the written Torah, had him write it down. Because he spoke down face to face. In other words, each and every Hebrew letter in this written Torah is the exact words that he spoke to him. So that's why there's secrets in the Torah, and that's why they call Moses Moshe Rabbeinu, Moshe our teacher. Nobody will ever exalt themselves above Moses. The limit, the glass ceiling, okay? I'm trying to say it in a way that can illustrate the true meaning of the caveat of chapter 34, verse 10. It's a caveat. You see this? This is the glass ceiling. Joshua, no one. Not the New Testament. The New Testament has no authority over this. Not Jesus, not anyone, not Paul, not anybody has a right to reinterpret it or change it or make something no longer like relevant in a way, to where it's been changed. There's some things that are not applicable anymore or not possible to do. That's different. But to change it? No. Or to write a new one or a Torah 2.0 or a second edition? No. Nobody will ever arise in Israel that will ever do that will ever produce these are the 5 books of Moses. Nobody will ever produce this again. Now, when it comes to chapter 18, verse 15 and 16 prophet, that is talking about specific prophets that God will raise up in times when Israel has a need to have a prophet arise. And prophets are usually not good news. When Israel's going in the wrong direction, bang, that's usually when prophets like Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, and so forth are raised up. Now, it doesn't say that in verse 15 that people will listen to them the way they listened to Moses. And we see it repeated first in verse 15 of chapter 18 of Deuteronomy, and again in verse 18 of Deuteronomy, chapter 18. So we've got, it's a repeat. So clearly one is talking about prophets such as, but not limited to, Isaiah and Jeremiah and Ezekiel and the minor prophets, or King David and some of the, you know what I mean. The Talmud says there was 1.2 million prophets throughout the history of Israel, but they were only for short durations of time, and that's why there was never any ink devoted to them in the Tanakh. Now, the big difference between ordinary prophets like Isaiah, Jeremiah, and so forth comes to us in chapter 12 of the book of Numbers, 12 verse 6. And 12 verse 6 of the book of Numbers, and God continues to say, hear these my words. When a prophet of the Lord arises among you, I make myself known to him in a vision. I speak to him in a dream. Not so with my servant Moses. Okay? With him I speak mouth to mouth plainly and not in riddles. Okay? So that's why the Torah is different, and that's why they always say Moshe Rabbeinu. They don't give that title to Isaiah, Jeremiah, even though Jeremiah, Isaiah, and so forth are very revered, but they did not hear the voice of God plainly as a man speaks to his friend face to face in that way. And neither did Joshua, and that's not what raising a prophet like from among their people like you means. It's not what it means. It just means that they will revere you. Okay, so here we go. Let me read chapter 15 through 19. The Lord your God will raise up for you a prophet from among your own people like myself. Him you shall heed. Now here we go, the explanation. This is any prophet in the future, and the reason is because when they heard the voice of God, it was so huge and frightening that they literally died on the spot, and their souls lifted out of their body, and angels had to come and put the soul back in. So they pled, let us not hear the voice of God in the real way that it sounds in our, from, you know, let you go up speaking to Moses, and you hear what he says, and we will listen to all that you say. So Moses went up and privately heard the voice of God and went back down and relayed it, and they followed him. Okay, that's what they were promising. So God's saying, forever I'm going to continue with this promise, or that they made to you, that they would always revere and listen to a prophet that I raise up. Okay, so this is any prophet down the line. This is chapter 18, verses 15 and 16 of the book of Deuteronomy. Okay, that would be inclusive of all prophets. Now it's repeated again, and the Torah does not repeat for no reason. It repeats because there is a detail here that you need to pick up on. Okay, so I'm going to read 15 through 16. The Lord God will raise up for you a prophet from among your own people, like myself. Him you will heed. This is just what you asked of the Lord your God at Horeb, that's Mount Sinai, on the day of the assembly, saying, let us not hear the voice of the Lord my God any longer, or see this wondrous fire any more, lest we die. Whereupon the Lord said to me, they have done well speaking this. Now instead of having a Mount Sinai experience everywhere they go, well, we need to hear the voice of God because we're going in the wrong direction. Instead of God saying, okay, everybody congregate around this new mountain, and I'm going to speak my words against you. Everybody can hear it and have no question. God says, I'm going to raise, instead of doing that, which would really take away their free will and make the purpose of life diminished a lot, he says, I promise I will raise a prophet from among their own people, and I'll put my words in them. So that would be any of the judges, the magistrates, the Levite priests, where they have to repair to if there is some kind of a dispute which is too complicated, or some matter of the law that's a little too complicated for them to understand. They go to the bigger rabbis, and this would be the Sanhedrin types, or a prophet that's sent. Anybody that has the name of God and a message from God, that is what God promises to do in the time of need when Israel has a need, whether it's a decision that's complicated of the Torah or some sort of a civil dispute, or if it's a prophet, because, prophets are usually not good news. They're usually sent when Israel is going astray. Now, when we come to verse 18, I will raise up a prophet for them from among their own people like yourself. I will put my words in his mouth, and he will speak to them all that I command. And if anyone fails to heed the words that he speaks in my name, I myself will call him into account. Okay, so that there is clearly speaking about Joshua. And I went into that in detail from chapters, and I went to the point of dispute with Christians that Christians have, because they want to believe it's Jesus. But let me ask you this. It says, like Moses, who may have had divine intervention in regard to him showing up on the scene, but he didn't have divine origins. He wasn't God in the flesh. Nobody would ever consider Moses to be someone that anyone would worship, but only revere. You see what I'm saying? Now, Jesus, on the other hand, not that I believe the backstory given about him in the Gospels or in any of the writings of Paul, we see divine origins, and we see a whole different, we see something that doesn't resemble anything of the normal human origins that Moses clearly has. Okay, So we don't see that. We see everything calculate in Joshua verses 1 verses verse 5, verse 16, 17, and 18, and verse 4, 14. You know, and yeah, we see similar events that happened to Moses happen also with Joshua. It's Joshua. But what chapter 34, verse 10 is a caveat saying that nobody will ever come up with a new written Torah or a written Torah 2.0 or a second edition to the Torah, and anybody that says so in the future, you can write that off as a false prophet immediately. Any claim that anyone that comes along and says somebody later on in the distant future rose up and to claim to have authority over the Torah, greater authority than God gave to Moses, then that person is a fake and a false prophet. Okay? That's the caveat of chapter 34, verses 10. Okay? But the prophet of chapter 18, verse 18, is without a doubt, Joshua. And a prophet of chapter 18, verse 15, is all through Jewish history. Whenever there was a prophet raised up from among their own people, it was because they did not want to hear the voice of God anymore, lest they die. It terrified them because it was too much. So, there we go with that. And I could go into deeper details. You know, this is just, I'm trying to make it as quick and sensible as possible. I don't want to drag it on any longer. Okay, well, here we go with that. Over and out for now.